Ma... ma... The sound was small, fragile, and almost impossible to hear, but it stopped Harry Rutherford cold in the doorway. His coat was still on, his briefcase hung from his hand. For a heartbeat, he couldn't even breathe. His twin sons, the children who had never spoken a word, never taken a step, were facing the maid. Jessica knelt on the hardwood floor, arms outstretched, yellow cleaning gloves still on. Her voice was low, steady, a lullaby Harry hadn't heard since his wife died. Mason's trembling hand reached toward her. Jaso's lips parted again, a second syllable breaking the house's long silence. Ma... Not a cry, not a reflex, a word. The boys were moving, stepping, reaching. Not for Harry, not for the therapists, for her, for the maid he barely knew. Harry's heart hammered against his ribs. He had built this house to be silent, orderly, unbreakable, a fortress against grief. And yet, here in his own living room, the impossible was happening. His sons, once trapped in stillness, were calling someone Mama. Jessica didn't look back at him. She stayed still, whispering, coaxing, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Harry tightened his grip on the briefcase, the leather creaking under his fingers. Everything he thought he knew about his children, about control, about what could or couldn't heal, was unraveling right there on the polished floor. And he hadn't even stepped inside the room yet. Harry didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was too tight, his mind already pulling at the edges of disbelief. He stood just beyond the doorway, half in shadow, half in sunlight, the words Ma, Ma, still echoing like a hallucination in his ears. Mason had dropped gently to his knees now, not hurt, just exhausted. Jaso sat beside him, his tiny hand resting on Jessica's knee, like it had always known the way. The moment was already fading, retreating back into the quiet. But the damage was done. Something had cracked open. And once you've heard your child speak for the first time, even if it was barely a breath, you don't come back from that. Not the same man, not the same father. Harry stepped back before anyone saw him. The door clicked shut behind him with the same soft finality as every day before. But now the silence wasn't comfortable. It wasn't armor, it was unfamiliar. He moved down the hallway, slow, measured. The mansion stretched around him like a well-pressed suit, tailored, expensive, suffocating. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere in the formal wing. No laughter, no crying, just the constant clinical rhythm of order. It had been this way for 2 years, ever since Caroline died. The boys had come early, complications, nerve damage, paralysis. No one ever used the word vegetative, but it hung in the room during every diagnosis, every late-night consultation, every white lab coat shrug. Harry had nodded, signed papers, paid bills with fingers that never trembled. He'd buried his wife and inherited a future made of quiet hospital corridors and hushed terms like non-verbal, non-ambulatory, unlikely. He was not cruel, he was not indifferent. But he had learned to stop hoping. Routine was safer, control was cleaner. The boys had a schedule, nurses, therapists, physicians, oxygen backups, and floor plans built for accessibility. There was no mess, no noise, no surprises. That had been the deal. Then, 3 weeks ago, Jessica Martins walked in. Hired through a referral, she came with strong references and a quiet manner. Early 30s, black. Wore her uniform with respect, didn't ask questions, cleaned thoroughly, kept to herself. She wasn't meant to matter. She was background. But the boys had started tracking her movement with their eyes, subtle at first, then longer, more deliberate. Their hands would twitch when she passed near. Their breathing would calm when she sang softly under her breath, sometimes so faint that the baby monitor barely picked it up. The nurses said it was coincidence, maybe even confusion, just sensory stimulation. Harry believed them, until today. He reached his office and closed the door, resting his back against it. The silence inside felt different now, not like before. He could still hear it. Not the song, not the footsteps, just the sound of 2 boys, voices like wind through thin glass, reaching for something they'd never had the words to name. Ma! Not a miracle. Not quite. But something close enough to make a man like Harry Rutherford start to question everything he thought was possible. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to be alone with the answers. Harry didn't go back to work that afternoon. He didn't check his meetings, didn't call the estate manager, didn't respond to the nurse's briefing waiting on his tablet. He sat at his desk for nearly 20 minutes without moving, staring at a smudge on the glass. Ma. The syllable had been thin, barely formed. But it wasn't a fluke, not an echo or artifact of imagination. He had heard it, felt it, the weight of it still pressed against his chest. They had said it to her, not to the speech therapist who charged $3,000 an hour, not to the neurologist who gave him PowerPoints instead of answers, not to him. Jessica, the maid. He couldn't say her name without a strange twist in his throat now. Harry stood and crossed to the window. From his second-floor office he could just make out the edge of the east garden, the boys' play area such as it was, a sterile patch of grass lined with padded mats and foam equipment no one had ever used. Most days it looked like a forgotten showroom, a staged space for a family that didn't exist. Except today, someone had opened the windows. The curtains fluttered, the air smelled like fall, and Harry felt, for the first time in a long time, like he didn't recognize his own home. He left the office, walked the halls slowly, not toward the living room, but around it, through the gallery corridor, past the portrait of Caroline holding an empty basket in a field that had never really existed. He stopped in front of it, staring at the painted sky. He whispered to no one. "Did you see them?" The silence didn't answer. When he finally returned to the nursery, the twins were asleep. Jessica sat on the floor nearby, writing in a small cloth-bound notebook, her back straight, knees tucked beneath her. She didn't look up when he entered. Harry stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Then, too tightly, he said, "What were you doing?" Jessica closed the notebook calmly, placed it beside her and turned toward him. "Reading to them," she said. "That wasn't reading. They like the rhythm. It settles their breathing." Harry stepped inside. His voice didn't rise, but something sharp leaked through it. "They spoke." She nodded. "I know. You think that's normal." She tilted her head. "I don't think anything about them is normal. That's the point." He stared at her. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize. She just looked present, like this wasn't a crisis, but a continuation of something she had already known was possible. "They said, Mama," he muttered. "They don't know what that word means," she said gently. "Not yet. But they said it to you." Jessica's gaze didn't waver. "They said it to the one who's been holding them, feeding them, talking to them even when they couldn't answer." She wasn't gloating. Her tone wasn't defensive, just factual. "You were hired to clean," he said. Jessica gave a small nod. "That's what the contract says. Then stay in your lane." A silence stretched, not angry. "I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mr. Rutherford," she said quietly. "But they don't understand contracts or boundaries. They understand presence." Harry felt the heat rise in his neck, and he didn't know if it was shame or fury or something in between. He wanted to walk out, to end this conversation, to fire her maybe, reassert control. Instead, he asked, "What else have they done?" Jessica paused, choosing her words. "Small things. Jaso turns his head when he hears my voice. Mason's been trying to mimic shapes with his mouth. It's early, but it's real. And you didn't think I should know." Her eyes softened, but she didn't retreat. "I thought you wouldn't believe me." Harry turned toward the cribs. The boys were still, but their breathing was steady, deeper than usual, peaceful. He looked at Jessica again, and for the first time, he didn't see a maid. He saw the only person in the house who had spoken to the boys like they could hear her. And maybe because of that, they had. He left without another word. That night, Harry didn't work late. He didn't go back to the office. He sat in the downstairs hallway and listened as Jessica sang the boys to sleep. And somewhere between the third verse and the silence that followed, He realized he hadn't thought about Caroline in a way that hurt all over. Not once. Just long enough to wonder what tomorrow might sound like. Jessica never changed her rhythm, not after the boys spoke, not after Harry's questions, not even after the silence that had followed his quiet exit from the nursery that night. She kept folding laundry in perfect rectangles, humming softly as she worked. She still wore the same plain uniform, kept her shoes by the back door, and left notes for the nurse with polite, rounded handwriting. If she'd sensed a shift in the house, and surely she had, she didn't show it. What did change slowly and deliberately was the space around her. The nursery, once sterile and whitewashed, had started to soften. Toys weren't arranged for aesthetics anymore. They were where the boys had left them. Books stayed open, not shelved. The curtains were drawn back just a bit more each day, and in the corner, near the small upholstered chair no one had used in years, Jessica kept her notebook. Inside were pages of observations, Jaso's fingers curling when she touched his palm, Mason humming, faint and off-key, when she played certain songs. Small, strange patterns she was still learning to name, moments she didn't want to lose to forgetfulness or skepticism. She didn't try to convince anyone, not the nurses, not Harry, not even herself. She just showed up, every morning, every moment. She talked to the boys like they were listening, read to them like they might understand, sang lullabies like the words mattered, massaged their hands gently before nap time, rubbed lotion into their legs, brushed their hair while whispering stories about frogs and lions and stars that blinked back. "It's okay to feel things, baby," she told Mason once, her voice barely above a breath. "You're safe." What she didn't know was that Harry was in the hallway, frozen, listening. He didn't mean to be there. He'd come upstairs to drop off a signed consent form for the occupational therapist, but when he heard her voice, something stopped him, not the words, the way they landed. Jessica wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just there, fully, as if nothing in the world mattered more than the twin boys in front of her. Harry stood in the shadows for a long time that day. That night, he pulled up the estate's internal security logs and skimmed back through the nursery's footage, not to invade, but to understand. He watched Mason tracking her across the room with his eyes, watched Jaso open and close his hand every time she paused near his crib, watched Jessica lift each boy, gently, slowly, speaking to them like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't science. It was something harder to measure. He turned off the monitor and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel in control. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be. The specialist arrived on a Monday. Dr. Kelman, Harvard credentials, unflinching jawline, one of those men who always smelled faintly of dry cleaning and eucalyptus. He'd been recommended by a neurology contact in Zurich, someone Harry trusted, or used to. He stayed only 30 minutes. Jessica was not invited to the meeting. Harry sat across from Dr. Kelman in the drawing room, sunlight pooling across the herringbone floor, untouched tea between them. The doctor flipped through the twins' medical history like it was a disappointing portfolio. "I see the caregivers have logged recent vocal attempts," Kelman said without looking up. "Unintelligible sounds, possibly imitative behavior." Harry kept his face still. "They reached for her," he said quietly. Dr. Kelman paused. "Who?" "The maid." Now the doctor looked up. His brows lifted slightly. Not mockery. Not yet. Just the subtle adjustment of a man preparing a professional response. "Mr. Rutherford," he said carefully, "I understand how these moments can feel transformative, but we must stay grounded in neuroreality. These children have significant motor impairments. Non-verbal, likely non-symbolic cognition." They spoke. "Reflexes," Kelman replied calmly. "Breath against the vocal cords. A pattern your brain is desperate to interpret as language." They reached for her. They'll reach for sound, for vibration, warmth, not necessarily meaning. Harry's jaw tightened. The conversation ended 5 minutes later, politely, with handshakes and scheduled follow-ups. But that night, Harry didn't sleep. He paced the hallway outside the nursery with the doctor's words crawling through his skull like static, not necessarily meaning. He walked to the living room, turned on the stereo system for the first time in months, and stood there unmoving as the speakers hummed to life. He played nothing, just let the wires warm up. And then he heard it. From the hallway, a melody, not the stereo, not the nurse. Jessica. She was singing. He followed the sound. It came from the kitchen, dim, quiet, just a low golden glow above the sink. Jessica stood barefoot, swaying slightly, holding Mason in her arms like she'd done it 100 times before. Jasso was dozing in a nearby carrier, half tucked beneath a fleece blanket with stars on it. She sang slowly, a lullaby too soft to place at first. Then Harry's breath caught. He knew that tune. Caroline. It was hers. Not a popular song. Not something you'd find in a baby book or parenting blog. A tune she'd made up while pregnant, simple and strange, with 3 little nonsense words that only she ever used. And Jessica was singing it, perfectly. Harry stepped into the room, his voice a whisper. "How do you know that song?" Jessica turned, not startled, just still. "I found it," she said. "Where?" She reached to the counter and picked up a slim, worn notebook, pages fragile at the corners. She handed it to him like it was a child. She had tucked it behind the bookshelf in the nursery, Jessica said. "There are recipes, notes, a few poems, and the lullaby." She titled it, "For When I'm Not There." Harry couldn't move. His hands trembled. He opened the notebook, recognized Caroline's handwriting instantly. Slanted, neat, always blue ink. There it was, the lullaby, his wife's words, in her voice. Jessica watched him for a long moment. "I wasn't trying to overstep," she said softly. "I just thought the house needed music again." Harry didn't reply. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. He looked down at Mason, asleep against her shoulder. One hand rested over Jessica's heart like it had found its home. The tears came slowly, like his body had forgotten how to let them fall. Not loud, not broken, just real. He sat down on the floor beside the kitchen island. The marble was cold against his back. He didn't speak. Jessica didn't offer words, she just sang. And the mansion, for the first time in years, didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt like something was waking up. The grass hadn't been stepped on in months. Not since the estate groundskeeper trimmed it for spring, and certainly not by small feet or soft hands. The east lawn, once designed as a children's garden, had become just another manicured part of the property, beautiful but untouched. The foam mats had long since gathered dust beneath the patio awning. Toys sat in plastic crates, unopened, and the ramp that led down from the terrace had never been used for anything other than deliveries. Until today. Jessica had asked for the morning nurse to help her carry the boys outside. There was no fanfare, no announcement, no therapists present. Just a fleece blanket laid gently across the grass, a few soft cushions, and the twins. Harry watched from the driveway. He hadn't planned to. He'd been returning from a cancelled meeting, the kind he would have once rescheduled 6 times to avoid coming home mid-morning. But today, something in him had turned the car toward the east side of the estate instead of the garage. And there they were, Mason and Jasso. Not lying flat in hospital beds, not encased in monitors. They were propped gently on cushions, facing the breeze, blinking at the sky like they'd never seen it before. Jessica knelt beside them, brushing a blade of grass across Jasso's hand, his fingers curled. Mason made a sound, not a word, not a cry. Just a small, surprised noise, like wonder trying to figure out how to breathe. Jessica smiled. She didn't force anything. She didn't narrate. She just let the world be new around them. Harry stepped out of the car slowly, one hand resting on the hood. No one saw him. He didn't move closer. He didn't want to interrupt whatever this was. Jasso reached for a dandelion. His hand missed, but his eyes didn't. They stayed locked on it, as Jessica held the stem and let him try again. And then, Mason, unprompted, stretched his hand toward Jessica's. This time he touched her, not a brush, not an accident. His fingers wrapped around hers, tightly, with intention. Jessica didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just nodded once, like she'd been waiting for this, like it was the answer to a question she'd asked 100 quiet times. Later that afternoon, Harry came home again, properly this time, through the front door, in time for his usual debrief from the staff. But no one met him. No therapist updates, no agenda, only a note taped to the refrigerator. It was a drawing. 2 stick-figure leaves with little faces, one smiling, one curious. Between them, a stick figure in a yellow dress. The caption, written in looping, careful handwriting, read, "Today they reached." No explanation, no clinical terms. Harry stood there for a long time, reading those 3 words over and over. The drawing trembled slightly in the air from the overhead fan, as if the whole house was exhaling. Later that night, he placed the drawing in his desk drawer. Then he shut his laptop. He didn't reopen it. Instead, he walked upstairs, not to his study, but to the nursery. The lights were dim. Jessica had already left. The nurse sat reading in the corner. Mason and Jau were asleep, their hands loosely curled, their cheeks flushed with air and sun. Harry sat on the floor beside them, his back to the wall, arms crossed over his chest. He didn't speak, didn't try to touch them. Just breathed, listened, waited. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like presence. It began with a voice memo. Harry hadn't meant to hear it. He was reviewing estate expenditures when he accidentally clicked the wrong file in Jessica's shared staff folder, a space where she uploaded cleaning checklists and supply requests. Nothing more. But this wasn't a checklist. It was audio. He recognized the rustle of soft bedding, the sound of Mason babbling quietly, the faint creak of the nursery floor. Then Jessica's voice, gentle and close to the mic. "That's right, sweetheart. You can tell me, even if it's just sounds. I'm listening." Pause. "Mama?" Another pause. Then a laugh, not hers but Jau's, delicate and breathy like wind brushing a wind chime. Harry froze. He listened to the whole thing twice. Then he shut his laptop and went to find her. He didn't knock. Just opened the kitchen door where she was scrubbing something under the faucet, sleeves rolled, hair tied back in a scarf. She turned calmly. "Is something wrong, Mr. Rutherford?" "You recorded them?" Her hands stilled. "For the nurse. She doesn't always see what I see." "You saved it in the staff folder." Jessica nodded. "I wanted someone else to believe it." Harry stepped into the room, the tile cold under his shoes. "They're calling you Mama," he said, the word sticking on his tongue like it betrayed something sacred. Jessica wiped her hands with a towel and leaned against the counter. "They don't know what a mother is." "But they're saying it." She met his eyes, steady, unapologetic. "They're saying it to the person who shows up." The silence between them cracked, not with shouting, but with the kind of stillness that comes after something huge has shifted beneath the floorboards. Harry's jaw clenched. "They have a mother," he said. Jessica didn't flinch. "They had one. And she loved them. I'm not here to replace her." "You're crossing a line." Jessica folded the towel carefully, placed it beside the sink. "I'm not the one who built the line," she said. "I just didn't see a reason to keep pretending it keeps love out." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You think this is love?" he asked, sharp, desperate, the first true fracture in his tone. "Letting them cling to you like that? Letting them think—" "I didn't let them think anything," she said gently but firmly. "They decided. You weren't there." That landed harder than she meant it to, and she knew it. But she didn't take it back. Harry's hands curled at his sides, not in rage, in grief, in panic. "You think I haven't tried?" he asked, quieter now. "You think I didn't want—" "I don't think anything," Jessica said. "I see." Another silence, this one fuller, not angry, just heavy. "You want to be the one they reach for?" she asked finally. He didn't answer. Jessica stepped forward, not closer, not invading, just enough that he had to look at her directly. "Then reach first," she said. "Be what you needed someone to be for you. Be it for them." Harry's throat felt tight. Jessica walked past him slowly toward the hallway. Before she left the room, she said only this: "You can take it back. You just have to want it." She didn't slam the door. She didn't wait for a response. And the next morning, for the first time since the twins were born, Harry Rutherford didn't go to work. He sat on the nursery floor, awkward in his expensive shirt, and watched his sons sleep. When they stirred, he didn't call the nurse. He reached out and waited to see if their hands would reach back. The storm rolled in quietly, not with thunder, but with a steady pressure in the air, heavy clouds settling low over the Rutherford estate like a second ceiling. Rain tapped softly against the nursery windows, a rhythmic whisper that filled the quiet without disturbing it. Harry sat on the floor. Again. Third morning in a row. He wasn't good at it, this being still, being present. He was stiff in his joints, awkward with his hands, unsure where to look. But the boys didn't seem to mind. They didn't ask for words or performance. They didn't need him to know what to do. They just needed him there. Jessica had said it once. Presence isn't a skill, it's a choice. So he kept choosing. He'd begun reading to them, one page at a time, his voice lower than it used to be when he gave keynote speeches or interviews. He wasn't sure they understood the stories, but that didn't matter. Their eyes followed the movement. Sometimes their lips did too. Jessica still kept her journal, but now it rested on the windowsill, open, unhidden. Harry had even added a few notes of his own, tentative observations, nothing dramatic. Mason turned toward the sound of the bell. Jaso blinked in rhythm with the mobile. Small things, but real. That evening, the storm picked up. Wind howled faintly through the chimney shaft. The power flickered once, briefly, and then held. The house felt smaller, wrapped in weather. Safer, somehow. Jessica brought in extra blankets, one for each crib, one for the rocking chair. Harry didn't leave. Around midnight, thunder cracked overhead, sharp and sudden. Mason startled. His hands twitched. His eyes flew open. A soft whimper pushed from his chest, barely audible. Then came something else, a sound, a syllable. Ja. Jessica froze. Harry sat up straighter, heart hammering. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Jessica nodded once, slowly. Mason blinked. His lips moved again, struggling to shape the air. Ja. It wasn't random. Not a cry, not mimicry. Jessica leaned closer, her voice soft. "That's him trying to say my name." Harry's throat went dry. Jessica. Ja. The boy's mouth was forming the shape of the only name he'd attached to safety, to comfort, to presence. And then, like a harmony being discovered, Jaso stirred in his crib and echoed the same sound, broken, breathy, but unmistakable. Ja. Harry looked at Jessica. She wasn't crying, but her whole face looked like something had opened. "It's not language yet," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's trust. That's what speech is, at the root. A reaching out." Harry swallowed hard. He crossed the room and placed his hand gently on Mason's back, unsure if he was even allowed to. But the child didn't flinch. Jaso murmured again. "Ju." Jessica closed her eyes. And Harry did too. He had waited 2 years for a miracle, and it didn't come in surgery, or science, or some grand revelation. In the middle of a storm, in the smallest sound a child could make, and the unbearable weight of knowing it meant, "I'm here, I see you, I want you near." Jessica didn't say a word about the offer. It came in a neat envelope. Cream cardstock, gold-trimmed, a high-end private therapy center across the state, triple the salary, housing included, flexible schedule. They'd heard about her through someone on the nursing rotation, watched footage, read notes. Empathetic instinct, the recruiter had called it. A gift for connection. Jessica folded the letter and placed it at the back of her notebook. Then she went back to folding the boys' laundry. She didn't tell Harry. She didn't want to confuse clarity with pressure. And she wasn't sure what her answer would be, but the twins noticed. Not in words, not in tantrums, just something, subtle. Mason grew fussy in the afternoons, restless even when held. Jaso stopped humming during lullabies, watching Jessica's face as if listening for something he didn't understand. They were regressing, not physically, but emotionally. The house felt it too, like the air had lost some unspoken thread. Harry noticed. He didn't say anything for days, just observed, listened. One morning, he watched from the hallway as Jessica knelt beside Mason's crib. Her hands moved slowly over his blanket, smoothing out corners that didn't need fixing. He asked, "Are you leaving?" Jessica didn't look up. "I haven't decided." "Why not?" She gave a small shrug. "They're not mine." Harry stepped into the room, crossed his arms. "They think you are." Jessica smiled sadly. "That's not the same thing." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set a folder down on the changing table beside her. "I had it drawn up yesterday." She looked at it, heavy cream cardstock again, but this time her name was on the front. Inside, a guardianship proposal, partial, shared. No obligations, no legal traps, just a space carved out in writing for what had already been true for months. Jessica flipped through the pages, her face unreadable. At the end, a handwritten note clipped to the last sheet. "You're part of this, whether or not you want a title." Jessica closed the folder. "I need to think," she said quietly. Harry nodded. "Of course." She stayed in the nursery that night, not out of duty, just because the rain came again and the twins had been restless. She rocked Jaso gently until he slept. Mason curled up against her chest. The thunder outside was louder this time, but neither boy cried. And then it happened. Both boys stirred, pushed up on unsteady elbows, and reached for her again. This time not with open hands, but with sounds. "Ma!" Jessica froze. They were choosing, not out of habit, not reflex, not dependency, out of recognition. They knew who she was, and they were asking her to stay. The next morning, she returned the guardianship folder to Harry, signed. She didn't say much, just slid it across the kitchen island, her fingers brushing the edge. Harry looked down, then back at her. "Thank you," he said. Jessica nodded. They asked, and that was all it took. Not a promise, not forever. Just the house wasn't silent anymore. It wasn't loud either. It didn't echo with dramatic change or suddenly fill with the chaos of laughter. But something fundamental had shifted. There was music in the hallways now, not through the speaker system, but humming, breathy and soft. Toys stayed where the boys left them. Crayons appeared in the kitchen drawer. A paper crown sat on the windowsill for weeks before anyone thought to throw it away. The mansion had a pulse again. And so did Harry. He didn't speak about it. The shift, the fear, the way guilt still scratched behind his ribs in quiet moments. But he moved differently. Slower. Present. He cancelled his trip to Geneva. Pushed back 2 major board meetings. Hired someone else to handle the estate's investments, at least for a while. He began therapy. Not because someone told him to, because he couldn't keep living inside a version of himself that no longer matched his children. He didn't become perfect. Didn't suddenly know how to braid hair or do sensory games or tell bedtime stories without stumbling. But he showed up. Every morning. He sat cross-legged on the nursery floor. Let the twins climb over him like a jungle gym. Change diapers, clumsily, with far too many wipes. Read aloud from the old children's book Caroline had written notes in, sometimes stopping mid-sentence when his throat caught. Jessica never corrected him. She just handed him the next book when he was ready, and the boys, Mason and Jaso, were changing too. They didn't speak fluently, but they reached faster, looked longer, sounded out syllables with more purpose. They'd started pointing, not randomly but with decision. They grabbed spoons, held eye contact, followed the light. On their 3rd birthday, Harry didn't plan a gala. There were no photographers, no press, just a quiet backyard gathering. Jessica baked the cake herself, one layer, white frosting, no writing. The boys wore matching soft blue shirts, hands sticky with icing, cheeks pink from the sun. A few family friends came, the night nurse, Carolyn's sister Charlotte, who hadn't visited since the funeral, but now lingered longer than expected. It wasn't a party, really, more like a confirmation that this family, this fragile constellation of people, was something real. At one point, a woman leaned down beside Jessica and smiled gently. "Are you the nanny?" Jessica looked at her, didn't respond. Jasso tottered forward, clutched Jessica's leg and murmured, "Mama." The sound was soft, but it rippled through the group like thunder beneath velvet. Mason echoed it a beat later. "Mama." No one spoke. No one needed to. Harry looked up from where he was slicing fruit. His eyes met Jessica's. He didn't nod, didn't smile. But everything in him said, "Yes. Yes, they see you. Yes, I do too." That night, after the guests had gone and the cake had been cleared, Harry read the twins to sleep from the notebook Caroline left behind. Jessica sat beside him, one boy against each of their shoulders, and for the first time since the night he lost everything, he didn't feel haunted. The mansion still held echoes. But now, they weren't echoes of what had been lost. They were echoes of the life that had found its way back. Not perfect, but true. 6 months later, the swing set was finally installed. It sat at the far edge of the garden, just beyond the hydrangeas Caroline had planted in her first spring on the estate. 2 seats, wide, low to the ground, with adaptive harnesses and soft rubber grips. The boys didn't run to it. They didn't leap or scream. But with Jessica's help, and Harry's hand steady at the small of their backs, they sat. One swing at a time, Jaso first, then Mason. Harry pushed gently. Slow arcs, a creak with each rise and fall. The air was warm with the scent of sun-soaked earth. The leaves above the patio rustled quietly, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed faintly, not loud, not disruptive, just life, carrying on. Jessica sat on the low stone bench nearby, ankles crossed, watching them. The boys were laughing. It wasn't big, theatrical laughter, just small bursts, soft, broken, real. Harry had never heard anything more sacred in his life. After a while, he slowed the swings and crouched between them. "Want to try it together?" he asked. The boys didn't answer with words, but they reached for each other. Harry lifted them gently onto the same swing, arms around both. They clung to each other, legs dangling, heads tilted in opposite directions, like mirrored reflections. The swing shifted with the weight, then steadied. Jessica joined them, slipping her arms around all three from behind, careful but whole. No cameras, no therapists, no speeches, just the sound of wind, a creaking swing, and the layered heartbeat of a family that had been broken and chose to begin again, not with promises, just with presence.